Good afternoon again, class. It's again our uh, session for the last and final lecture for this particular module on value chain analysis. This particular module will run us for the next hour of really understanding what value chain is all about. Now, last meeting we discussed about the underlying concepts and principles in understanding about value chain analysis. That value chain analysis is a interconnection of various players or entities responsible in bringing the product from the point of inception until it reaches the final customers, undergoing through various uh, changes or transformation along the chain as provided or as uh, facilitated by all uh, players along the value chain, which will also constitute different business or enterprise along the chain. Now, also, it's not only a connection of various entities or enterprises, but it's also a structure of an industry. And in fact, it's also considered as an economy in itself, where you can see the various players within an industry, starting from how the product is conceptualized until it reaches the final customer. So uh, this particular lecture today will give us uh, an explanation of one remaining question that needs to be dealt in this uh, concept or approach planning tool we call value chain analysis, and that is how to conduct a value chain analysis. We have already understood what is value chain analysis, value chain as a demand chain, and at this juncture, probably you can now differentiate what do we mean by value chain and what do we mean by value chain analysis. Okay, so we'll tackle the particular question how to conduct a value chain analysis. First, we need to we need to refresh ourselves rather of this uh, schematics on value chain analysis or a value chain in itself. We call it the overlapping regional and value chain business communities. Okay, illustration figure ABC will also give us a rundown, a diagrammatic differences in terms of whether a value chain is purely a product or a service enterprise. But in terms of the, the nomenclature in terms of the various segments, we can see that whether it is regional or local, whether it is service or physical product, they all uh, give us the same description in terms of how to represent the various segments of the value chain. No, so that value chain can be local, value chain can be regional, and value chain can be uh, global also, or crossing across international boundaries. Now, how do we know that it is basically local, and how do we know that it is basically regional? Well, we can diagnose that by looking at the how long is the chain from product inception until it reaches the final customer. When the chain only is able to complete all the segments from inception to final sale within a particular community or within a particular province, then we call it a local value chain. But when the downstream part cuts across various regions. It could be a regional value chain or it could be a national value chain. Much more if it reaches other countries, the end point of the value chain is in the other country. Now it is an international or global value chain. You can also see the participation of other players. Maybe one segment is located in this particular province, the other segment is in another province, and the other segment is already far, far in several other provinces or regions. In that case, for 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 how long or for wherever we can trace the end point of the chain, then that should be the boundary, that should be the coverage of the chain. Okay, just like for example, when we trace the value chain for abaca fiber or abaca, it it stretches across 5 different regions in the Philippines because various segments are actually uh, uh, present in various regions, and each particular player has its own dedicated chain participants, so that we trace the inception, the upstream part of the chain until we reach the downstreammost part, which could be, or in which case it could be in the other region or it could be in other provinces. Okay, so that is how a value chain could be could cover or could spread. No, so a value chain also can be multi-chain location, one value chain, there is also another value chain, and then it depends on what particular, say uh, factors we are looking at. No, so for example, in the case of coconut oil, a value chain for coconut oil in the case of wet process, and another value chain for coconut oil in the case of dry process. Okay, so the wet and the dry process follows a totally distinct value chain. Now, in that case, there are two value chains that we need to trace. Now, much more if we have another process, we call it the virgin coconut oil, the crude oil, and the crude oil constitute either a wet or dry process. Okay, and then the virgin coconut oil is does not have any heating at all. So the virgin coconut oil could be a one distinct process or value chain, so that it could differentiate which value chain is more profitable, which value chain is more, say for example, dynamic or something like that, and which value chain is more, say, is more inclusive in a way. No, so it depends on what particular value chain are we tracing, so that a particular value chain traces the product characteristic and nature consistent from the inception until the final sale. So if it differentiates along the along any of the other segment into a different product, then that particular branch could be a different value chain. Although it converges at the upstream end, but somehow it will split up into two value chains somewhere at the even processing or even at the marketing segment, depending on the nature of product that has been transforming the value chain in particular. Okay, now the degree of regional clustering could also be a factor in really, say, for example, classifying a value chain. There could be a value chain that is specific for a particular market. There could be a value chain also that is specific for a particular industry. No? So it be a differentiation of different value chain. It could disperse to different locations depending on the final market also. If you are catering to, like for example, small SMEs, the other one is MSMEs, or the other one could be catering to specific, for example, specific market like government entities. The other one is more of the other private NGOs. Then that kind of value chain could behave differently. No? but it could also be regional clustering in that sense. No? Now, value chain as an economic cluster denotes a subsector or an industry. If it is uh, if it is an economic cluster, no? Usually if it is an economic cluster, it behaves like a totally different like industry in a particular geographic location. Usually there is almost like an aggregation of um, similar industries in a particular geographic area. By virtue of economic geography, they have some kind of like agro-industrial business corridor. Okay, an agro-industrial business corridor that produces a certain product and catering to a particular market, and that corridor is a cluster of producers producing the same product and catering to a specific or the same market also, no? So it could be like that, because especially if one particular group within the cluster cannot really uh, serve the market entirely, it needs to congregate with other clusters in order to create volume and economies of scale to be able to serve a certain market profitably. Okay. So that is the benefits of economic cluster, as what we have like exemplified in the previous lecture. The pineapple processing is an economic cluster because the production could be huge and diverse, but it's catering to specific market. No, economic benefits of geographical proximity also is one particular factor enjoyed by this different cluster of players constituting an economic cluster and a separate value chain at that. Now, upgrading a local cluster, call it also that upgrading would mean how we can improve, particularly a value chain cluster by certain upgrading. Now, when we improve, we need economies of scale or either economies of scope. Now, the value chain analysis can answer that. Which one is more profitable? Are you going to produce volume of the same product, or you are going to produce diverse products using the same raw materials? It could be that could be an object for value chain analysis, looking at the profitability of uh, producing in volume as economies of scale would dictate, or producing in various or multiplicity or duplicity of products using the same raw materials. So that will be economies of scope then, no? So there are benefits to that, and then we can also use that as an object for value chain analysis. Now, so those are the different, say, schematics of value chain configuration. Now let's now come to or go to the key steps in value chain analysis. Well, the first one is the first step, necessary step in value chain analysis. First is prioritizing the value chains for analysis. Okay, assuming, for example, you are confronted with, like, for example, certain commodity, and there are, or there are certain, there are, confronted with various commodities like agribusiness commodities. Which of these agribusiness commodities deserves to be analyzed using VCA? Okay, so, in other words, in judging whether this particular value chain is worthy of uh, using or analyzing or assessment using BCA, we need to have basis in prioritizing for all of this. For example, somebody will tell you, we have this number of crops, apple, coconut, etc. And then so you have to you have to make a judgment whether all these crops follow a certain standards, or shall we say all these crops would have the same degree of priority in the contribution to the economy. Okay, so you have here the first step in doing a value chain analysis is prioritizing value chain segments or criteria. Now you have in prioritizing, you have to determine the criteria for prioritization of value chain, and then another is what are the weights in terms of each criteria, assign weights. And then number three, identify a list of potential products and services. And then number four, rank them according to, for example, priority as you evaluate each chain. Okay, so in this at this particular stage, you have criteria one, two, three, four. Assuming you have these different criteria, no, depends your criteria will be poverty alleviation, or you have environmental consideration. It's whatever criteria, what or criterion you are going to include, that will also judge the priority of that particular value chain. Dili, dili, dili siya pwede na kumo that is a kuan that is there's a need to do value chain analysis, so you have to do value chain for all crops in the community or in the municipality. You have to prioritize because we know that doing a value chain is not a joke. It involves investment. Okay, so that whatever particular crop or commodity that warrants, that allows investment to be worthwhile, din mao na imong priority, no? So you have criteria one. As I said, this criteria could depend on you, either environmental, it could be like environmental, or it could be like, for example, economic contribution, or it could be infrastructure, it could be capital, whatever criteria, or it could be in terms of how it can address poverty alleviation or poverty reduction. So from among these criteria, you put weights. So criteria one, poverty alleviation, so they say requirement. You might be assigning that as, for example, 50%. Probably because you want a value chain, commodity value chain that is inclusive. That means to say it has the ability or the capacity to mobilize the poor to be engaged in that particular industry. So you put a weight like, for example, 50%. Then which value chain could qualify? Value chain one, maybe how many percent you're going to assign there, value chain two, and so on. And then for criteria two, you also have to assign weights. It depends on what particular criteria and what priority or weights are you going to assign. And then summing that up in terms of the different criteria, you will now have a tentative, say, for example, information in terms of which one is more priority for analysis. So the other thing, after prioritizing, the next step is mapping the core processes. Okay. So what are the processes involved? Okay, in that value chain? For example, value chain one, input, then these are the processes involved, cultivation, and then the retail. And then process, say, value chain two, you have input, production, primary processing, and secondary trading and retailing, and so on. And value chain letter C, you have input, production, trading, and retailing. So you have a value chain that is relatively longer. You have also a value chain that is relatively shorter. So how do we judge then which one is would be more preferable? Well, it depends on first your budget, because if you have a value chain that has a very long segment configuration, please remember that you have to interview players in each segment. So the more segments you are going to interview, the more players that will be involved in the analysis. And of course, it becomes more complicated, but not only that, it becomes more expensive. So it depends on really the resource constraint, and of course the amount of data that you can get. Probably you would, from the vantage point of expenditure or expenses or budget, you would prefer to select the one with shorter, say, shall we say, shorter segment connection. Well, it depends, because sometimes if there are shorter connections, these are huge enterprises, and normally entities with very huge conglomerate configuration has a very sticky procedure and policy in being able to get the important data from them. So mas maayo man tong gagmay-gagmay lang, daghan sila. Kay dali ka nga collect og data based from experience. But sometimes, kaning gamay ra kaayo, dagko kay nga mga companies connected together, very matipid kaayo sa data sharing. So that's a constraint, no? That's a constraint. I have done that before. I interviewed food processors, various food processors in the Philippines for different food categories, food processing MSMEs or SMEs, but only to find out that huge corporations, which are very important players in the research interview, will not allow me to get any data at all. Di mga ni ko pasudlon sa ilang complex. So what can you do? You cannot proceed with the data gathering because you are not even allowed to enter into their premises. So I requested for the cancellation and change of, say for example, respondents. Out of the 100 questionnaires I distributed, not even 15 returned to me, and that 15 is not even complete information. So that's also one thing. So it depends on the situation, whether very important the budget and at the same time the amount of data that you can get. Okay, that's mapping. How do you map out the configuration? Now, still of mapping, you have mapping on terms of the core processes. This is one example of mapping. No? You have here basically the activity surrounds around surround I mean revolves around export market. So that means these are all exporters. That means we see the different complexity in the configuration of the value chain. So we have to trace from the cassava roots, from the input, and then it becomes pellets, and then to the export, and then it penetrates to the foreign markets. How this is one configuration of a particular industry value chain. Okay, another is in value chain mapping, you have also to identify and map the main actors involved. Okay, it does not only involve mapping the core processes, but we also involve mapping the main actors. Who are the main actors? Okay, so you have here uh, production. Who are the actors in the production segment? The collectors. Who are the actors in the collection? Intermediaries. And then collectors also, I mean, the actors also in the intermediary trader, wholesale, etc. No, so you have to include in the map all the various actors, the major ones, because you have the processes, you have the actors, then you can match later on in terms of where the intervention, if there is an intervention at this particular process, who are the actors involved there? Okay, so that is also one particular way of looking at the mapping. Huh? Not only in terms of core function, not only in terms of the different actors, but also in terms of activities of each actors and processes. Okay, what are the activities involved? Now, what are the activities? So remember, you have core processes, you have actors involved, and then what are the activities in each actor, and in each core process or segment, so that by knowing the activities, you need to get also some information in terms of revenue and cost, so that the the whole analysis can be complete. Okay, so still in mapping, on step number 4, we also need to see what are the external influences. Okay, in mapping, remember in mapping there is one particular level. In mapping you have the core function, the core actors or players, and then you have also the activities, and then you have also the external influences and enablers. Who are the enablers? Na activity, different activities in each segment, and who are the enablers in each particular, say for example, uh, core function and also activities. Specific kaayo ang enablers niya. Well, could it be say for a supermarket, or will it be Department of Agriculture? Will it be an NGO or industry association? It depends, no? So you have here uh, uh, different external influences and enablers, no? Or it could be uh, the the Department of Finance or Department of Bureau of Internal Revenue, depending on what particular, say, services involved that these different actors are dealing with. For example, in processing, when we talk about processing, you cannot the obvious enablers there could be either DTI, or you have Department of Science and Technology. It cannot be Department of Agriculture, because Department of Agriculture is primary commodity. Okay, primary. Wala pang processing imo. Involved na nga ni kag processing DTI or DOST na or other responsible entities. Okay? So that is how the mapping should be done. Remember, mapping should be done in terms of the core processes, the major actors involved, the core activities, and of course the external influencers or enablers. So kinahanglan makita na sa imong value chain map configuration. Okay? And then another one, in the still on value chain analysis, you have in the value chain map, there are we have to observe in each connection for each segment. There is what we call as three types of flows. Now there is something that is flowing here and there in each segment. There are three types of flows. One is information flow, product flow, and material or money flow. Okay, money flow. So let me repeat that. In the value chain mapping, in the value chain segment, there are various types of flows that are occurring in various direction. One is information flow, technical information, supply information, quality information. These are the informations flowing with across participants of the value chain. Another is there is also what we call as material or product flow. Okay, there is a change of ownership, so we have to monitor and we have to take note whether the quantity from the production and production segment, how many, what volume of that particular quantity goes to the trader and goes to the processor, something like that. And then the material flow actually also involves the flow of physical goods. Okay, flow of physical goods. How many percent goes to various uh, players along the chain? Okay, how many percent goes to the traders? How many percent goes to the processors? And finally, how many percent goes to various different types of, say, markets or consumers or customers? How many percent goes to the export? Something like that. So we need to know this. No, we need to know this. And then finally, you have the money flow. When there is material flowing, the exchange of that is money. Okay? In other words, the payment flow, the money flow. So there is, you pay for the transport, and then you also buy something from your customer. So there is an exchange of payment. So we need to monitor whether the amount paid is commensurate to this to the goods it receives. No? So that means, is there a value, no, in terms of revenue and also cost, as the goods or as the commodity, as the product flows from the upstream end down to the downstream end, there is what we call as transmission and translation of either cost or revenue. Okay? Now, when you sell, what you receive is selling price. But the selling price that you receive is actually cost, translated as cost by the next end of the chain. And then that one again, they will put more value to that by sorting and classifying, and they will sell that again to the next segment. Okay, they will pass that again to the next segment. So the selling price that they receive is actually cost to the other end of the chain. So there is exchange or of money um, between the one selling and the one that is buying. No? So that is money flow. So the the money flow also, and even the information flow, is also refined in terms of network relationship existing within the chain. No, here you have different types of network relationship. If you can see in most common representation, if you can see a bold line occurring within that connection, that means to say that is what, depending on the color, but usually bold lines are actually representing certain uh, tractable, say, relationships, or the bigger it becomes, the more, say, tractable that relationship is. It can also be coded as either financial or service flow. But usually, if it is a broken line with question mark, although it's not represented here, a broken line connecting one segment to another with a question mark, that means that particular network relationship or segment relationship needs improvement, and it's not yet stable and needs improvement. So you have to take note of the various nomenclature or representation in terms of how we read the the arrows and the arrows and the line connecting each segment, because it can mean a lot. And even the color, no, even the color could mean something in terms of how we read the overall map of the value chain. Now, in terms of logistic issues, we can also see that occurring. No? You have here an example of logistic issues, so that across the different chain, you have the chain here is represented by the color. The bold ones, the very black one is for farmer, and then you have sub trader with broken line, and then the other broken line is wholesaler. That means uh, for each specific problem, the the color code that really matches that particular problem represents that that particular problem or issue is happening or is affecting that party those part this that particular players. No, you will notice, for example, fluctuating market price. Okay, fluctuating market price, almost all of the players along the chain have that party is facing that particular issue. But when it comes to, for example, high labor cost, now it seems that it's only the traders that are so affected with that. The farmers might not be affected, probably because they use their household labor or family labor. But if you look at poor road condition or FMRs, you have the black and the broken diagonal line. This means that It's only an issue among farmers and traders. All the other players along the chain is not much affected. These are an issues in terms of prioritizing interventions. Okay, this is how we represent the dynamics. Now, so these are the, I would say, imperatives in value chain analysis: the mapping and the diagrammatic representation in terms of connections, the arrows and the arrowheads, and the dotted lines, and the color of those arrows connecting each segment should be carefully read. And then, of course, in the map, you have four areas of concern: the processes, okay, the core functions, the players, the activities, and the relationships or the different flows, no? Or the enablers. So finally, you have that map. What I know what uh, transpires or what is accomplished after the mapping is really a readable value chain analysis that will tell us in terms of the total dynamics of the industry or a particular enterprise or a particular commodity, say, chain. Thus, the full value chain analysis is more specific and objective based use of the map in addressing research question. Okay, these maps can be used as basis in determining value chain actors, not only to be interviewed, but also in terms of possibility for intervention or improvement. Kinsa nga mga segment players that are needing who needs this particular intervention. Okay, and then translating those maps means using them to address a specific research question that will be for the improvement of the industry. Now, some conclusions: value chain is innovation based. Okay, siyempre, innovation based because value bitaw. When there is value, it could be an added benefit, it could be an added experience, or it could be a new product and processes. So there is innovation, or there is technological development, development that benefits the market. Because after all, innovation is technology plus benefits. That is always the case. If there is a technology and there is no benefits, perceived benefit yet, then there is no innovation yet at the time. And then value chain analysis is also customer is the source of value. That is always the case. If your customer is not well defined, then your value chain analysis can go awry. In other words, can go anywhere because you don't know your customer. Who are your customer in the first place? what what do your customers want or need? So it is like sailing in the very wide ocean and you don't know where to go. There is no wind favorable to you in that case. So customer is always the source of value. That means if we do value chain analysis, we know our market. We have to understand our market better. And then the other thing is that value chain analysis focus on downstream. Remember, value chain analysis is demand chain analysis. And then where is the source of demand? The customer. That means the downstream end. It's not the farmer, it's the customer in that market. And then translate that demand specification and how do you produce that? How do you serve that particular demand specification? So, with that note, no, that almost concludes the essential uh, say, uh, preparation of how to do value chain analysis. What is a value chain and what is a value chain analysis? Okay? Be sure that at the end of this lecture, you can perceive and you can differentiate what do we mean by value chain and what do we mean by value chain analysis. Why are they different, or where is the thin line of boundary between them? Be sure to know that, because the next time you will hear that again will be during the exam. Maybe. No? So be sure that when we say value chain analysis, it's market based, it's innovation based, and it is focused on the customer. Focus on the customer. So with that note, to make good ideas happen. Thank you, and I hope that you will review the recording of this lecture so that you'll be able to understand better and review what are the important things to do when we do value chain analysis. Thank you and have a good day.